Asked for Attorney General nominee William Barr, live Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. The House earlier today passed a bill funding the Interior Department and national parks by a vote of 240 to 179. That was the fourth spending bill the House approved this week to reopen parts of the federal government. But the Senate has said that they will not consider any of these spending bills because President Trump has announced that he'll veto them if they reach his desk. The House is done for the week, so is the Senate. But this morning, House lawmakers debated a measure that required federal workers who've been furloughed to be retroactively paid after the government shutdown ends. Here's a look at that debate.
As we, Mr. Speaker, enter day 21 of the Trump shutdown, it is incumbent upon the House to do everything we can to address the pain and suffering being felt by dedicated federal workers who are missing their paychecks. Most of them are living from paycheck to paycheck. And now they approach this day on Friday having moved from paycheck to no check. Today, 800,000 federal employees will not receive their first paycheck of this new year. Regardless of what members think about the causes of the shutdown, every single one of us should agree that hard-working federal employees who give their blood, their sweat, and their tears to lifting us up as a nation should not be held hostage to politics as a result. 380,000 federal employees have been furloughed and locked out of their offices. Another 420,000 federal employees, hardworking employees, working without pay. We will see them at our airports. We'll see them working today and tomorrow, and have been for the last many days without pay. Some even had to cancel already scheduled vacation days or sick leave to report to work. These 800,000 men and women include personnel at the Federal Aviation Administration, the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security, the Food and Drug Administration, and Departments of Agriculture, Treasury, and Justice. These are the men and women who keep our country safe, ensure the safety of our airports and food, protect our national parks, and yes, keep our economy moving. Senate Bill 24 should provide back pay to federal employees furloughed during this shutdown and potential future shutdowns. The measure also would allow essential employees to use their annual leave instead of having to cancel already scheduled and approved vacation plans. Many federal employees are suffering. But not only are they suffering, Mr. Speaker, their children are suffering. And they are in pain, and they're worried, and they're scared. You see, they have mortgages and car loans to pay, daycare expenses to cover, and food to put on the table. And even while they struggle to pay these bills, furloughed employees face the stress and anxiety of not knowing whether or not they will be paid when the shutdown ends. The least we can do is to relieve that uncertainty. The President claims that federal employees support this pointless shutdown. He also had the nerve to say Why don't they just adjust? Adjust with what and how? And so I've not heard that from a single federal employee that they support this shutdown. What they want to do is to get back to work serving the American people. And what they are saying over and over again is, government, do not hurt us, help us. Do not hurt us, help us. So promising they will receive back pay once shutdown is the least that we can do. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this bill passed the Senate with every single senator's consent. And President Trump has indicated that he will sign it. I urge every member of the House to do the same and support this bill. And let's end this shutdown and get the government open and working again. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. Gentleman from Montana is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of S-24, the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019. This bill is a promise to our dedicated civil servants, both those forced to the sidelines and those still hard at work without pay. When the House Democrats stop using federal employees' livelihoods as a political football to fund the government, including border security, paychecks will be issued. Mr. Speaker, to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we get it. You don't like the president. You made your point. It's now time to stop messing around. We need to fund the government so we can make good on the promise in this bill. And let's be clear, this bill does not stop the immediate pain of missed paychecks. Under S-24, federal employees still do not get paid until the funding bills are passed and the government is reopened. Federal employees will still struggle to find ways to put food on the table and make ends meet until the House Democrats agree to negotiate in good faith. This bill also does not reimburse taxpayers for all the missed government services like our national parks and Indian Health Service. Every day this shutdown continues, taxpayers are on the hook for paying federal employees for jobs they are legally barred from doing. Every day this shutdown continues, Border Patrol agents and other federal employees are forced to work without pay. And every day this shutdown continues, many members of Congress are still getting paid. I've instructed the administrative officials with the House to withhold my pay until the partial shutdown ends and until Border Patrol agents and other federal employees are paid. Members of Congress should not get paid when portions of the federal government are shut down. There are other pieces of legislation that would pay federal employees who are working during this partial shutdown, and there are others that would hold Congress accountable for not doing its job. I will support the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act, but I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, end the games, get back to work, let's get the job done. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Montana reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi.
Gentlelady is recognized. Speaker of the House for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Assistant Speaker. I thank Mr. Cummings for bringing this important legislation to the floor in very expeditious time. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent yesterday, and here we are today on the first day that some of our federal employees will miss their paycheck, that Congress is saying and guaranteeing that workers will be paid not only for this shutdown, but God forbid if we have any future ones, that their pay will be guaranteed. I support the bill. I'm glad that it has strong bipartisan support as it did in the Senate, and that the President has given the impression that he will sign the bill. It ensures that 800,000 federal employees who are going without pay because of a senseless shutdown will ultimately get the back pay they deserve. But it's scarce consolation for these workers who are desperate to make ends meet right now. Their paychecks are going to be late, but they must pay their bills on time and in full. The impact of a missed paycheck is catastrophic in the lives of these Americans when they can't pay their mortgage, their rent, their utilities bill, their car payments, children's tuition on time. The list goes on. It affects their credit rating, and it affects the credit rating of the United States of America. I'm particularly concerned about the impact that it has on our veterans. A large percentage of the federal workforce are veterans. They have taken their commitment to public service in the military to public service on the civilian side. We don't do any favor for our friends, our veterans and military families if we affect their credit rating. So today, the press reported that workers are desperately taking to the internet to sell some of their household items and other things, sometimes at a very reduced price, for just a couple of dollars, just to pay their bills. This is just not right. It is just not right that we would subject people who work, say two things to them: come to work and don't get paid, or shut them out so they can't come to work. And while they're not getting paid, again, thousands of these men and women are expected to show up for work. Sending these workers their paycheck late is wrong. We keep saying that. It's wrong. But since there is a guarantee that they will be getting paid, I would hope that the commercial banks, the banks in our country, would follow the lead of some of the credit unions by giving interest-free loans right now to these families so that they can pay their bills in time and they can be respected for the work they do or are anticipated to do. This shutdown, by the way, is soon to become the longest in history, and it's creating chaos in our communities. It fails to have us, the government, meet the needs of the American people. We're endangering the safety of our food supply, the security of our airlines, the eviction of vulnerable families is affected, the support of our farmers and for their support systems, as well as food stamps for the hungry and tax refunds for the American people, and the ability of the IRS to supply information to taxpayers who want to pay their taxes but need guidance. It's a needless crisis that is inflicting pain on the American people. Democrats support effective border security. We honor our oath of office to protect and defend our borders, our country, our people, and our Constitution. We need to look at the facts. According to the DEA, when the president says, oh, we've got to stop the drugs coming into the country, well, let's look at the facts. The DEA says that almost all, 90% of the illicit drugs coming into the country come in through legal ports of entry. If that's the president's concern, and it is a legitimate concern that we all share, we need to build the infrastructure, increase the size of infrastructure of the legitimate ports of entry. Those are ports of entry for immigration, for trade, and to stop the unwelcome in terms of drugs, contraband, and weapons coming into our country. So more infrastructure, improve the roads there to facilitate. We also need, the technology exists, and we've all committed that we would pay whatever it is, $400 million or more, for the infrastructure, the technology to scan the cars for the drugs and the other contraband. So again, technology is our friend in this, and it is very effective, proven way to protect us from those intrusions. We can hire more personnel, which we must do. There are thousands of unfilled positions with the Border Patrols. We must have more people to do the job there. Much of what I'm saying here is what the administration, well, the Department of Homeland Security, asked for. And we said yes in the appropriation bill and bills, and here we are having that fight later. And we can have more investment in innovation to detect unauthorized crossings. So we don't need what the president first described as a concrete wall 30 feet high paid for by Mexico. Cross out all of the above. It's not that. But the fact is, spending money on whatever that is that the president is describing it now as is an opportunity cost for doing what we know will work to secure our border, all of our borders, all of our borders. There is a humanitarian challenge for us at the border that we have to deal with in a way that is consistent with our values, but also protects our border. What the president is proposing, in fact, he has exacerbated the problem with his cruel policies of taking children out of the arms of their parents, separating families, the list goes on. But to the point of securing the border in a strong, cost-effective, values-based way, Democrats have made that proposal. The proposals have bipartisan support. And let me just say, just before this bill came up on the floor, we had the legislation to pass a bill passed by the Senate on the to open up the Department of Interior and related agencies there. We have said to the Republicans and to the president, we will accept ideas, good ideas, wherever they come from. And these ideas came from the United States Senate, controlled by the Republicans up until this new Congress, just within the last month. They controlled that. Well, they still do control the Senate. And they put forth legislation on the floor of the Senate in a minibus that passed 92-6. We said, let's take your language, let's embrace your language, let's pass it on the House, and you once again pass your own language. They won't take yes for an answer. And that might be part of a legitimate debate. But why do you have to shut down government? Do you not have confidence? I say to the president, don't you have confidence in your own ideas that you have to shut down government to increase your leverage and then threaten to take extraordinary measures when this answer is very simple? Let's open up government, let's have a civilized debate, and let's do so in a way that honors our values as we protect our borders and meet the needs of the American people. I urge a yes, and I'm glad that we're going to come out of this with a bipartisan vote. And again, I thank Mr. Cummings for his extraordinary leadership in so many ways, most recently on this legislation, and yield back the balance of my time.
The distinguished gentlewoman yields. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. And the gentleman from Maryland reserves.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, will control the time for the minority. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my friend, the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Maryland, for expeditiously bringing this piece of legislation to the fore, because this is an important piece of legislation that ensures all federal employees receive back pay once this government shutdown is over. Last week, while flying back to Washington, I spoke with TSA agents who were concerned about their paychecks and the uncertainty created by this shutdown. Guaranteeing back pay is the least we can do to give more certainty to almost 1 million federal employees, including many in my district, who are missing their first paycheck today. I understand their concerns because my pay is being withheld during the shutdown in solidarity with federal workers. We all need to come together and find a bipartisan and realistic solution to reopen the government. If we are going to talk about border security, then the brave men and women who are on the ground every day securing our border should get paid. Border security and immigration have been a contentious issue for a long time, but the only way we solve big problems here in Washington is by working together. We need to push pause on requesting specific conditions before talks resume. We need to lay down our swords and be willing to find not a Democratic solution, not a Republican solution, but a solution for all Americans. I urge my colleagues to stand with federal workers and join me in supporting this common sense piece of legislation which has passed unanimously by the Senate last night. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia and a member of our committee, Mr. Connolly, 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank my dear friend from Maryland for his leadership. I certainly support this bill to keep our federal employees whole. But I must say, when I hear the discussion, and when I heard the words of our friend and colleague from Montana, I thought, are we rewriting history? This isn't about who likes President Trump or who does not. Where is the outrage in this body? When do we finally say enough? We had a bill, a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate. It was ready to pass here. The White House had said they'd sign it. And because 4 or 5 right-wing talking heads scared the President of the United States, he pulled the plug. Democrats didn't do that. Republicans didn't do it. He did it. And now you're defending him, enabling him. Even when he says, I never said Mexico would pay for the wall, even though we have 212 explicit references in the last 3 years in which he said precisely that. And meanwhile, because of that focus, which came out of the right field, 800,000 federal employees and all American citizens are held hostage. When do we come together and say enough? When do we stand up for those federal employees who are civil servants, who serve our constituents? And when do we say this shutdown threatens the security of the United States? It is wrong, and we have had enough. So it's good that we're going to keep our federal employees whole when the shutdown ends. But let's come together and make sure this shutdown ends, even at the risk of taking on the President of the United States politically. At the last analysis, can we not come together and do the right thing for the American people? I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Maryland
I reserve the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm going to continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield my distinguished friend and gentleman from the state of Maryland, Mr. Bastian, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 800,000 American workers, 800,000 workers in our federal workforce have either been sent home and furloughed with no check or told to report to work with no check, with no payment. I've got air traffic controllers living in my district, Mr. Chairman, Madam Speaker, who have had to take money out of their kids' 529 college funds, have had to take money out of their own retirement funds in order to pay their family bills. And there's a 10% penalty for doing that. Who's going to pay them back the 10%? Is the President of the United States going to do that? What about my constituents? I have tens of thousands of federal workers. What about my constituents who are being forced to put their mortgage on a credit card this month? Who's going to pay them back? And what about the dishonor and the humiliation brought on our government by this? The President of the United States didn't do this to hundreds of thousands of workers in Putin's Russia or in Orban's Hungary or in Duterte's Philippines. This is our people that he did it to. These are our workers who we sent home with no paycheck. People are texting me, they are emailing me their pay stubs today, which say $0 gross, $0 net, after having worked 40 or 50 hours this week. I've got scientists in my district who are working on preventing outbreaks of E. coli contamination, salmonella, insect infestation of our food supply, and they've been told not to go to work. Madam Speaker, this is an outright outrage and a scandal. At the very least, we can pass on a unanimous, bipartisan basis this legislation to try to repair the damage by saying that every federal worker will get back every penny that he or she is owed by the United States government. And we need to make sure that if this ever happens again, if the president ever holds the federal workforce, the government...
That bill passed in the House earlier today, 411 to 7. We will take you live to the Capitol now. Speaker Pelosi is set to sign it.